Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Dr. Jasmine, a scholar in English and American literature and a University of Cologne alumna. Whether you're here for the first time or following along, I'm glad you're joining us. So far, we have explored movements like moral criticism, dramatic construction, transcendentalism, and new humanism. Each of these movements has approached literature from a distinct perspective, whether emphasizing universal morality, formal construction, spiritual intuition, or ethical humanism. Today, we'll examine pragmatic criticism, which moves beyond universal ideals and textual form to focus on how literature affects its audience and fulfills its communicative purpose. Pragmatic criticism arose in the 20th century as new humanism's moral focus was critiqued for being overly rigid and idealistic. It emphasizes literature's utility, focusing on the interaction between text and audience, the rhetorical purpose of literature, and its ethical and societal impacts. First, let's go to the foundations of pragmatic criticism. Pragmatic criticism draws on classical rhetoric, which emphasizes persuasion, emotional engagement, and audience impact. However, it found its modern footing in the philosophical movement of pragmatism, led by American thinkers like William James and John Dewey. Pragmatism emphasizes action, experience, and practical consequences, principles that align closely with this approach to literary criticism. The key influence is John Dewey, whose book Art as Experience in 1934 argued that the value of art lies in its ability to create meaningful experiences. Literature, like other art forms, is significant when it resonates with readers, influences their thinking, and provokes emotional responses. This work established the philosophical foundation for pragmatic literary criticism. Let's go to the rise of pragmatic literary criticism between the years the 1930s to the 1950s. Pragmatic criticism grew as a reaction to more abstract and rigid approaches to literature. Critics began to focus on the function of literature, asking, what does the text do for its audience? How does it achieve its purpose? And what emotional, intellectual, and societal impact does it have? The key figures of this approach are, first of all, I.A. Richards, whose Practical Criticism book in 1929 introduced methods of close reading, focusing on how literature affects readers emotionally and intellectually. Although British, his work profoundly influenced American literary criticism, emphasizing that the value of a text lies in its impact on the reader rather than its formal qualities. The other key figure is Kenneth Burke, whose book A Rhetoric of Motives in 1950 expanded pragmatic criticism by framing literature as symbolic action. He analyzed how texts persuade and influence readers, examining social and ethical roles of literature. Burke's focus on identification and rhetoric brought pragmatic criticism into dialogue with sociology and communication studies. It's time to see pragmatic criticism in the 1960s, which is the ethical turn. By the 1960s, pragmatic criticism matured with a focus on the ethical dimensions of literature. Critics began exploring how literature shapes readers' values, beliefs, and actions. The key figure is Wayne C. Booth, whose book, The Rhetoric of Fiction in 1961, introduced the idea of the implied author and examined how narrative techniques affect readers. He argued that authors bear ethical responsibility for how their works influence readers, emphasizing the interplay between form, content, and audience engagement. Let's move on to reader response theory and pragmatic criticism in the years between the 1970s and the 1980s. In the latter half of the 20th century, pragmatic criticism intersected with reader response theory, which emphasized the active role of the reader in constructing meaning. The key figure is Stanley Fish, whose book, Is There a Text in This Class, in 1980, argued that meaning is created in the act of reading, not embedded in the text itself. This approach echoed pragmatic criticism's focus on audience impact and expanded it to explore subjective interpretations and the variability of reader experiences. The characteristics of pragmatic criticism could be summarized in these key traits. It is audience-centered. It focuses on how literature affects readers emotionally, intellectually, and ethically. It is purpose-oriented. It evaluates texts based on their effectiveness in achieving rhetorical and communicative goals. It also has ethical considerations. It examines the societal and moral implications of literature. And finally, it is interdisciplinary because it draws on rhetoric, philosophy, sociology, and psychology to analyze literature's function. Pragmatic criticism can be applied to analyze texts that aim to influence readers or provoke actions. Very good examples could be Mark Twain's Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, which is a novel in 1884, and it could be taken as a critique of racism and societal norms, which exemplifies literature's ability to provoke moral reflection and inspire change. The other good example could be Toni Morrison's The Beloved, which is a novel in 1987. Morrison's exploration of slavery and trauma engages readers emotionally and intellectually, demanding empathy and historical awareness. The other good example would be Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale, which is a novel in 1985 in which Atwood's dystopian novel warns against gender oppression and authoritarianism, using literature as a call to action for social awareness. There are also some critiques of pragmatic criticism. While pragmatic criticism offers valuable insights, it has faced criticism. For example, its subjectivity. Audience responses vary, making evaluation inconsistent. Moreover, there is a neglect of aesthetic form. Critics argue that pragmatic approaches sometimes overlook the formal qualities of literature. And finally, there are modern challenges. postmodernism's emphasis on textual instability complicates pragmatic evaluation of purpose and effect. To conclude, pragmatic criticism emerged as a response to new humanism, shifting focus from universal morality to the interaction between text and audience. It emphasizes literature's purpose, effects, and societal role, blending rhetorical, ethical, and experiential concerns. As you analyze literature, consider not only its themes and structure, but also its impact, what it seeks to achieve, and how it influences its readers in the world and the world. If you found this lecture helpful, please like, share, and subscribe. Drop your thoughts and questions below. I would like to hear from you.